Welcome to the Outthinkers podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kaihan, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. Dear listeners, this is Kaihan from Outthinker Networks, and this week I am excited to be welcoming you to what is officially our 100th episode since we began producing Outthinkers in 2021, and what a journey it has been. We embarked on this initiative as a way to connect with brilliant strategists in the business world and bring their insights to you, our listeners. 2 years later, we can surely say that the richness in ideas and context it has brought to us is beyond what we could have hoped for. In this episode, in lieu of a regular conversation with a featured guest, we want to take a step back and reflect on the 99 episodes we've aired so far, bringing to you a mosaic of some of our favorite insights over the years. We'll hear from legacy strategists like Richard Rumelt, Rita McGrath, and John Hagel, who will open the floor with timeless ideas all strategists should keep top of mind. Then we'll delve into the ideas of notables like Ajay Banga, former CEO of MasterCard, now the head of the World Bank, Sally Susman of Pfizer, and Johnny C. Taylor of SHRM, who will share how culture and the workforce are changing. And Elizabeth Altman, who offers a new perspective on how workforce is even defined in these radically changing times. We'll also rethink the very idea of value creation with insights from Felix Oberholzer-Gee from Harvard Business School, and Thales Teixeira unbundles or decouples the idea of disruption in the customer value chain, along with a few other notable guests. And lastly, we'll round out this episode with looking forward with futurist Faith Popcorn, as she candidly discusses some of the stark trends on the rise. And Vivek Wadhwa creates a picture that is both foreboding and inspiring of how we have the power to let technology take over or harness it for a brighter future. Our podcast has traversed the landscapes of over 30 topics with 99 guests, so picking only 18 guests to feature was quite a feat. We hope this encourages you to go back through our diverse library to listen to past episodes rich in thoughts that are sure to help you step into the future and execute with clarity. In this first clip, we hear from Rita McGrath, best-selling author, speaker, and longtime professor at my alma mater, Columbia Business School. She is widely recognized as a leading expert on innovation and growth through times of uncertainty. In this clip, she sets the scene for this 100th episode by sharing what she's learned during her career in strategic advising, that the landscape has changed so quickly, and what business leaders used to rely on for decision-making no longer works in the context of constant flux and uncertainty. Let's dive in.
So discovery-driven planning actually had its roots in some work I was doing on the subject of corporate flops. And at the time, these were big initiatives started by companies that are really well-run and really smart. So things like Federal Express's Zap Mail product and TV Cable Week, which is going to upset the TV franchise, and Bic Perfume. What I began to realize was that all these things were being meticulously planned with smart people who were at the top of their game. I mean, Disney, how much smarter can you be as an organization in the entertainment space than Disney? And yet, when they were going into something that was new to them, whether it was a new geography, as Euro Disney was, whether it was a new kind of offering like different media streams are now, but something that had a lot of uncertainty in it, you just couldn't plan it as though you had a platform of experience. And that really got us thinking about, well, how would you plan if you knew from the beginning that you didn't know, that the opportunity was to make discoveries rather than plan as though you had all the answers? You know, in a way, it flies against so much of what we're taught as managers, as leaders, which is the willingness to say, not only do I not know, I'm going to be very frank about the fact that I don't know. Then I'm going to construct a set of opportunities to experiment, which may or may not have a payoff, but will represent learning. So this then got me on the whole idea of discovery-driven planning to recognize that you have a lot of uncertainty. Now, what I think is cool about that now is we are all, whether we like it or not, we're all right now today in a high uncertainty situation. And so What a lot of people don't understand is that the tools of innovation are totally applicable to what you need to figure out in your strategy right now today. It's just many people have not been taught them. And it's because we're so invested in this exploitation phase that we don't teach people the whole life cycle. So one of the encouraging things, I think, for your listeners is the tools are out there. You just need to take some time to go get smarter about them. And so it's things like discovery-driven planning.
While Rita's clip highlights how critical it is to plan your strategy with flux in mind, this begs the question, what do we even mean by strategy? To help us answer this question, we turn to Richard Rumelt, known in the business world as a strategist's strategist, considered one of the world's most influential thinkers on strategy. In this next clip, we hear from the legacy strategist a crisp definition of strategy itself.
Right now, I'm particularly well known for the bad strategy concept because of my book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And I seem to have hit a sore point for literally thousands of people who've written me emails saying, oh my God, thank you for someone saying that this bump that corporate leadership's putting out is not a strategy. Bad strategy is of several forms. One form is just goals, just a bunch of things we wish would happen. You look at most of the stuff that government agencies put forward, and it's a list of 25 or 30 different things they wish would happen. Same thing with corporations. They'll say, well, our strategy is 15% profit and 15% growth. That's not a strategy. It's like a person saying, I want to be happy and rich. It's a strategy. I mean, a strategy is a design for dealing with a challenge or a problem. Whether you're playing chess, or it's the Russians in Ukraine, or it's a business, strategy means, the word means a design, hopefully a clever design for dealing with a complex issue.
In this next clip, we revisit John Hagel's groundbreaking concept of zoom out, zoom in. In addition to being a fundamental tool in any strategist's repertoire, it's also essential to keep in your pocket considering the pace at which the world morphs with each coming year.
It's very much inspired by my experience in Silicon Valley. I've been here for 40 years and worked with some of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley. And they pursue an approach to strategy that I've come to call zoom out, zoom in. It focuses on two time horizons in parallel. One is a 10 to 20 year horizon. And the key questions on that is, what is our relevant market or industry going to look like? And what's the big opportunity that we could be targeting and addressing 10 to 20 years from now? That's zoom out. Zoom in, very different time horizon, 6 to 12 months. And on that horizon, the questions are, what are the 2 or 3 initiatives, no more, 2 or 3, that we could pursue in the next 6 to 12 months that would have the greatest impact in accelerating our movement towards that longer term opportunity? And do we have a critical mass of resources against those 2 or 3 initiatives in the next 6 to 12 months? And then how do we measure progress? What are the metrics that we would look at to say, are we making the progress we thought we're going to make? So 2 time horizons, very different time horizons, but constant iteration between the two that I think is very powerful. If you're looking just 5 years ahead, you can pretty much convince yourself you're going to be in the same business 5 years from now. It may be, there will be some modest changes on the margin, but same business, same industry. If you zoom out 10 to 20 years and you understand exponential change and you think you're going to be the same business that you are today, go back to the table. You haven't figured it out. It takes leaders out of their comfort zone to ask the most basic question, what business should we be in?
We've now covered a good breadth of fundamentals and strategy, but often what brings this together is the frame or the organizational structure in each company. Without the right structure in which to unfold these strategies, a business is limited by its own capabilities. In this clip, Mike Tushman brings us the concept of the ambidextrous organization, turning organizational structure into a competitive advantage.
This notion of ambidexterity, Kaihan, in order to play in this innovation stream space, and Jim March had this notion of building organizations that can both exploit their existing strategy better than anybody in the world and explore into new spaces simultaneously. But this notion of explore and exploit is core to my work with Charles on ambidexterity. And what we observe that in order to execute these inconsistent strategies simultaneously is you've got to build multiple organizational architectures, multiple congruence models, if you will, that are themselves internally inconsistent. And what holds that together is an overarching strategy with an overarching identity of who we are and what we do. What we mean by ambidexterity is you split the past from the future. That's high differentiation. But in order for this to work, you need to have a senior team that can deal with tension, that can deal with conflict, that can deal with paradox. And oftentimes, the reason ambidextrous structures fail is because the senior team cannot deal with the paradox and tensions and contradictions associated with both exploiting and exploring simultaneously. So I would beg the strategy types in the room to help your colleagues attend to inconsistent strategies simultaneously in service of the overarching identity and help their colleagues deal with tension in the room. Because if that is not there, exploit always kills explore.
In this next set of highlights, we'll dive into the people that make strategy come to life. By that, we mean the leaders and employees. We'll explore several ideas and concepts, hearing an invigorating blend of practitioners, former CEOs, and researchers around these topics. In this first highlight, we hear from Adam Bryant, who has interviewed more than 500 CEOs as a long-standing journalist for the New York Times. He joined us on Outthinkers to share some of his insights on what makes a great CEO and leader.
We wanted to be clear on the questions we were asking. And the main one I think is captured in this subtitle, this idea like, what are the challenges that make or break all leaders? Why do people succeed or fail in leadership roles? And ultimately came up with 7 tests that we think help explain why people succeed or fail in their roles. And the first one is, can you just come up with a simple plan for strategy that everybody on the front lines can understand and also understand how their work contributes to that strategy? There's got to be like a clear line so that's not just a fancy slide in a deck. Can you build a culture, a high-performing culture? Can you build teams that operate like true teams? Because most leadership teams are teams in name only, right? They're not actually operating like a team. The fourth one is, can you really listen? Because I think listening is one of the most underrated superpowers of effective leadership. It's not typically taught in business schools, but I think it's so important. Can you drive transformation? Because transformation is now a process. It's not like an event, right? Everybody is doing this. Another test that we've learned the last couple of years, can you handle a crisis? And finally, for the last chapter, we shifted from this idea of what you do as a leader to how you need to be as a leader. So the last chapter is about what we call the inner game of leadership, and just how do you in your head get this infinite puzzle right so that you can be calm and confident and credible and not, these are big stamina jobs. You got a new problem coming at you every single minute. So how do you stay centered in your head so that you can perform at a high level?
In this next highlight, we'll hear from a distinguished CEO who led one of the world's most recognized brands for 12 years. Ajay Banga is the former CEO of MasterCard, where he spearheaded pivotal initiatives. Under his leadership, MasterCard expanded its global presence and played a key role in the digital transformation of the payments industry. And under his tenure, MasterCard's stock price rose from about $25 to $350. Today, Ajay takes his experience and skills to the World Bank, which he now leads. We'll hear some of his wisdom as a long-tenured leader.
I think the 3 things of influence that are very interesting, 2 of them start with H. One is humility. So the moment you come across as the guy or gal from head office who's here to tell you what to do, you're dead, right? The last thing a guy out in Singapore really needs is, I'm from New York and I'm here to tell you how to do better work in your business. That's right. Humility, the ability to learn from everyone, right? The ability to know that you don't know it all. And therefore, that open-mindedness that feeds the humility, that. The second H is a sense of humor. And you know this, you and I have known each other. We both have a sense of humor. And you know that I can laugh at myself and at you. And that ability to deliver important messages without the sting of a difficult message, the ability to lighten a room, the ability to bring oxygen back into a room. And the third one is about having a sense of urgency. Technology is changing everything. And technology is changing the pace of change. You don't have a whole lifetime to do things any longer. You need to get to a decision. You need to listen to people. You need to take that advice, but you need to make a call. You're going to have to take a risk because of the speed of change. And so I think the third advice I would give people about influencing people is about showing that sense of urgency, but in a constructive way, which starts with humility and listening, goes forward with humor and bringing the oxygen back into the room, but always demonstrates, guys, we got to get things done.
In this next highlight, we'll hear from Sally Susman, the Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Pfizer. She shares her invaluable expertise on navigating public discourse as a company, crafting a united message that reflects company values, and the importance of communication as an essential capability for any leader or company to master. Sally has had a remarkable career in navigating high-stakes moments, which she shares with us here.
Managing these kind of high-stakes situations is what makes my job so interesting and why I love it. We have a framework here at Pfizer that I developed to help guide us as to when and where we want to engage in public questions. It's 5 questions. The first is, does the issue relate to our purpose? And again, Pfizer's purpose is breakthroughs that change patients' lives, which means we shouldn't speak out on everything, because if you do, you lose your agency if you're always out there talking. Secondly, how does the issue, whatever it is, relate to our stakeholders? And then the third is, how does it relate to our values? And I'm very specifically here not saying to our politics, because companies, in my view, should not be political, but must be value-driven. So we have 4 values: courage, excellence, equity, and joy. And so we think about it through that lens. The fourth question is, what are our options should we choose to engage? Because I don't like to be reactive. And so often I find myself, a journalist has called and said, I've been working on this issue for 10 months and you now have 10 minutes to answer my question. I reject that. Or somebody's pushing a petition in your face and saying, all the other companies have signed. Why won't you? Again, I reject that. I think companies have the opportunity to wield their own pen, the power of their own voice. And then the fifth and final question is, what is the price of our silence? Because there's some issues, whether it's a racial injustice or violence in the schools, that just silence would be deafening. So we have this framework to decide when and where to engage. And these are never easy questions. They deserve to be grappled with.
Now we shift our focus to the workforce and employees. The last few years, with the pandemic as the main catalyst, changed the workforce as we know it. Johnny C. Taylor, President and Chief Executive Officer of SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, shares the monumental shift that happened and why every organization needs to reevaluate culture in light of this.
I'm going to say something pretty bold. Every company needs a reset of its culture after the pandemic in particular. It changed everything. And it's not hyperbole, it changed everything. And so what everyone's culture was pre-pandemic, it is worth a diagnostic look under the hood to ensure that all of the assumptions that we made 15 months ago still hold. We know that we're in the middle of the great resignation, the turnover tsunami. And that means whatever, even the best run companies are now seeing 20, 30% annual turnover. And they are all perplexed. They're like, wait a minute, with this perfect culture. And it's not an indication of your failure. It is literally the ground beneath you moved. And so what we're saying is, practically speaking, CEOs and other leaders have to go in and now do their own temperature check. Are our policies still relevant? Something as simple as, do we work in the office 5 days a week? That was a total norm in March of last year. And now it's not. So is it 4 days? Is it 3 days? Are we a hybrid work environment? Or are we an environment that says, you know what, our culture is so unique, we collaborate in person. If you don't come to work, you don't work here. None of those are right or wrong. This is not a test where you can be right or wrong, but you do have to revisit and say, in a post-pandemic world, does that still work? So number one, and just practical thing I would say to anyone listening is, you've got to sit down and you've got to engage in introspection as a senior management team. And you've got to be able to say, here are things about us that are great. Here are things about us that are not so great, but this is who we are.
We now hear a highlight from Tiffani Bova of Salesforce on the people that make it all possible, our employees. We're all familiar with CX, or customer experience. In this highlighted clip, we hear why it's essential to consider in parallel our EX as well, employee experience.
Employees are the keepers of our CX promise as a brand. You want to say we're going to be the best widget company in the world. Here is our values and vision statement. Here's our strategy. Let me just say to you that strategy one-pager and that vision and values statement and your tagline does not show up and solve a customer problem. It does not show up and sell something to a customer. It does not show up and design a product. People do that, not the strategy deck that gets you funding from your board. That's not who does it, right? Unfortunately, we've spent so much money on the customer that we have sort of left the employee behind. And so I'll give one stat down this path as well. 52% of the C-suite globally believe that the technology they're providing is working effectively, which means 48% don't believe it's working effectively. 32% of employees believe the technology they are using is working effectively. So already we have a 20-point gap between the C-suite and the general employee base. But wait for it, only 20% of customer-facing employees agree that the technology they're using allows them to collaborate effectively, be more productive and efficient at their job.
Adding on to the insights from Tiffani we just heard, Elizabeth Altman has been studying the effects on the workforce by not just technology, but the shift to decentralized business models, ecosystems, and artificial intelligence. In this clip, we'll hear some fascinating insights into how the workforce is morphing to expand its definition.
The other thing I would say, which took me a while to get my head around, is that for bigger companies, when you're talking about 50,000 contingent workers, for example, they're not going out and hiring each of them individually. They may hire individual ones. They're not engaging individually. They have deals with large labor organizations, Manpower, Randstad, SourceRight, such as that. And they can make a phone call or send a note these days and say, we need 10,000 software developers. And they will get 10,000 software developers. And those developers may be employees of another company. So you may consider them a contractor. And so they are a contractor to you, but they may be an employee to somebody else. So then there's a whole set of questions about who does the performance management, who does the training, who does the compliance. And again, this has been going on for a very long time, right? The notion of temps is not a new notion. It's just that now the scale is different. How those contingent workers are being involved is different. The other thing I would say is we've been focused in this conversation thus far heavily on contingent workers and contractors because that is a big part of a workforce ecosystem. But as I said, we also have developers, and we took it one step further and said the actors who are external to the company, although they actually might be internal also, could also be technologies. So these days we're talking a lot about AI, machine learning, generative AI, automation, robots, chatbots, whichever version you'd like to talk about. And so then someone will say, well, look, you don't do performance management. You don't do compensation. It's just not the same, right? And people have said that. And I'll say, well, do you do budgeting and resource allocation and figure out how much you want to allocate for these new technologies? Sounds a lot like compensation to me. Do you have metrics on how effective they are and how productive they are? Sounds a lot like performance management. So I think it's a very interesting question.
We now pivot to analyzing some fundamental shifts that have occurred in the perception of value in business over the last century. While value used to be thought of as a simple transaction from a business with a product or service to a customer, the definition has been expanding to encompass a much broader view. In this highlight, we get a small peek into Felix Oberholzer-Gee's value-based strategy. He shows that we shouldn't just be thinking about value to customer, but also value to supplier, value to employee. And if we expand what he's saying, value to the ecosystem. We should not be thinking just of value as a static transfer from company to customer, but rather a negotiated value you can and should strategically plan.
So yeah, willingness to pay and willingness to sell. The difference is that the value that you create, and then you set prices and you decide how much to pay your talent. And that divides up the value. And we have interesting mathematical models that talk about how the value gets divided up. But in a nutshell, much of it depends on the degree of differentiation from other firms, what other companies do. once you have value orientation in your company, that value orientation shows up in lots and lots of places, even in sometimes mundane decisions. And the story is, I have a friend who lives in Los Angeles, and I sent her flowers for her birthday. And one year I forgot. I don't know exactly what happened. It's usually in my calendar, but maybe I didn't pay attention. So I know there's a couple of days later, oh my God, it was her birthday. I didn't send flowers. So I called this flower store and I ordered my flowers. It's late afternoon. And the salesperson asks, should we send the flowers today or is tomorrow morning good enough? When I say, well, it's a little embarrassing. I forgot my friend's birthday. It'd be really great if you could send them as quickly as possible. And her response really surprised me. She goes, should we take the blame? Should we say it was our fault that the flowers didn't get sent? And of course, I did not want her to lie for me, but I thought it was so interesting how in a really seamless way, she thought about value creation opportunities for the customer in these probably unusual circumstances. That's what I've seen across many organizations, across many companies. Once you have this mindset that is all about value creation, it then shows up in really big initiatives, really big projects that come from top management. But it also shows up in myriad of ways in the small decisions that everybody makes every day. And the benefits is that you earn the customer's trust, you earn their loyalty. We feel good about dealing with companies that really have value creation as their main engine of financial performance.
In this next highlighted clip, we continue the journey into alternative paths to value creation and innovation with Thales Teixeira and his concept of decoupling. The idea that what drives disruption is not technology or new innovations, but the ability to identify and create solutions in the links along the customer value chain. And unsurprisingly, this is one of the biggest threats to incumbent organizations. As startups show time and again, this is where they excel.
All companies that become incumbents do two things. They broaden their offerings and they acquire customers with various different needs. The way to think about it is they have a kitchen and they start doing all sorts of types of dishes and they hire a bunch of people to be in the kitchen. In this process, sometimes they start burning the meat or they start missing the point on the dessert. That is the opportunity for the startup. When the company does a lot of things, it doesn't do everything in the best way possible for its customers. And customers realize it, right? If I ask you for examples of a telecom company or a bank that are not customer-centric, that irritate you, you and I can spend hours talking about these things. So there's a lot of opportunities and the startups are there to seize on these opportunities. They need to build a business. They have nowhere to go then up. And so they have to look at an opportunity where customers are being underserved or the established companies have just disregarded that activity and they think they can do well. So they start by doing something very narrowly, very well, and they start doing one dish. They do one dish very well. Even if they don't have all the resources initially, they don't have all the money, they don't have all the employees, they often don't even have the experience in the industry, right? Airbnb, the three founders had no experience in the hospitality industry, and they have the biggest hospitality company in the world. No experience, no money, no people. How can that happen? Well, it happened because they identified a weak link. That's what I call it. The customer value chain, an activity that many customers are having to do, but they're unsatisfied with. And so they go and steal that activity from established companies. That is decoupling. Breaking of the links between activities in the customer value chain. The incumbent does many things. The startup says, I'm going to do this thing better.
In this next highlight, we shift our mindset to thinking not just about value creation, but how to elevate the metrics that we use to understand where value comes from, specifically understanding which customers are most valuable to us, and we should therefore be serving differently. We hear from Pete Fader, arguably the world's authority on customer lifetime value. Let's listen now.
I hate it when companies say, yes, we understand our customers. And we have three types of customers. We have Working Wanda, Busy Betty, and Carpool Carla. And they come up with these ridiculous personas that they're just kind of making up or that the ad agency is making up for them, but are not necessarily really truly driven from a firm understanding of how their customers differ from each other, who's most valuable.
So this is where we start with customer lifetime value. Let us project for each and every customer, how long are they going to contemplate doing business with us? How much business will they do? How much money will we make from that? So we want to project the future economic value from each and every customer and understand what those numbers are, understand how those numbers differ, and understand so what makes the more valuable customers different than the less valuable ones.
Just to make sure that I'm following along.
Sure.
So I think of it as a discounted cash flow on a projected profit from one customer.
That is it. I was going to say that, but I don't want to turn people off and get all accounty and financy on you here. But that is it. And the nice thing about it is that because it is kind of accounty and financy, it's also a nice way to build bridges to that part of the organization. So instead of having the people who control the balance sheet and income statements look at marketing with the same nose scrunched up disdain and saying, oh, all the money they're throwing out the window, to do marketing in a very, very accountable way and starting at the customer level. What is the discounted cash flow, the discounted profitability from each and every customer? And again, understanding the differences across that and then how to leverage those differences to make more money than just to focus on the so-called average customer. Customer lifetime value is the way to really do that segmentation.
Expanding on the concept of value creation, in this next clip, we'll hear from Mohan Subramaniam, who has some of the most out-of-the-box perspectives on the subject. Here you'll hear him discuss why Porter's 5 forces has changed in meaning, considering the growing divide between legacy companies and digital ones, and their radically different approaches to value creation with the onset of data.
But connected to that understanding were also two related assumptions. 100% of revenues came from products or services. And to deliver those products and services, you need value chains. So the value chains became the engine for a firm's capabilities, and products and markets were means by which you could manipulate industry forces. And that combination of all that was what we understood to be competitive strategy and competitive advantage. Now, why is it less relevant today than what it was 40 years back? One of the prime reasons is that if you look at the most valuable companies in the world, 100% of their revenue comes from data, not from product. If you think of Facebook and Google, think about the value that they are creating. Google's value or Facebook's value comes from its digital advertising and all, which is largely a play of data. It's not necessarily products. The platform is a vehicle by which you can use data for massive, massive advantage. Now,
they are clearly able to do this because their business models are anchored at our digital platforms,
which intrinsically allow them to use data as a revenue driver and data. Now, for a vast majority of companies in our world today, they are the same companies that Porter talked about in the industrial age. They're still around, but they have lost their old sheen. They're not as valuable as the Amazons and Facebook because their business models, the value chain, product-driven business models, are designed primarily to drive revenues from product, not from data.
So the way we use data, by the way, I call them legacy firms. These are firms that are based on legacy from way before the arrival of the internet.
Now, for these firms, their DNA is about value chains and products, and data becomes a means to support products. If you really want to do something differently, I'm thinking why Porter's understanding gives us the foundation, but now we are thinking beyond that, is to see how a legacy firm can use its strengths in its products and value chains to become vehicles for new kinds of data that can drive greater value. So you don't have to be restricted by your value chains. You don't have to be restricted by your products. There is far more value possible with data. However, then you want to understand competitive strategy differently, which is not just about industries, because industries can amplify the value of your product.
Innovation is an ever elusive yet highly desirable concept all businesses seek to optimize and make part of their business identity. In this next clip, Alex Osterwalder, creator of the business model Canvas, shares with us one of the most seemingly simple yet oh so powerful methods for ensuring your individual employees feel encouraged to innovate.
Now, here's the key thing. When you execute, failure is not an option. You have a plan, you need to deliver on budget and on time, in innovation, that's the worst thing you can do, because actually you want to be really good at killing bad ideas, because there are a lot of bad ideas. And that's great, because you don't know before you explore if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Scott Cook from Intuit has a really nice way of saying it. He says, behind all of our big failures, we had amazing spreadsheets and PowerPoints. They all looked great. So in innovation, you need an exploration culture. So what you reward is exploration. You reward risk-taking, but in a structured way. Because it turns out if you do innovation right, it's actually not that risky, because you'll constantly kill the projects that should be killed based on evidence. And we now know how to do it. It's just that it's been a black box for a very long time for corporations, how to do innovation, because it's very different from execution. And now companies are starting to understand, and they're starting to invest in that. One of the key enablers and drivers of an innovation culture is that you are allowed to explore, you're allowed to fail, and you don't get punished for failure. And I'm not talking about building a new supply chain, because you've done that 20 times. That's an execution project. But when we explore, that's a different kind of project. There you need to take risks, but you need to take calculated risks. And if you look at the innovation world, the entrepreneurship world actually shows entrepreneurs are risk averse because they take calculated risks, right? So research shows they like risk less than the general population. What's going on? Because they take calculated risks. They know when to stop and they know when to advance. So we have these myths that are completely wrong when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship.
In these last few highlights, we'll broaden our horizon by envisioning what the future holds for business. The last few years have steamrolled any notion we had about emerging technologies. The advancements we've seen in the past 3 years are unprecedented, and we'll take a glimpse into the future, starting with Rob Wolcott, a friend and colleague who I'm writing a book with now, professor at Kellogg and University of Chicago's Booth Business Schools. We'll consider what technology is making possible beyond what we previously imagined through the concept of proximity.
So proximity, where did this come from? Well, about 6 years ago, as you know, I've always been excited by technology and how it changes life and world, society, and business and all that. And so we're seeing all these digital or digitally enabled technologies cascading across the economy, across all industries. And everybody's all whipped up into a lather about artificial intelligence and Internet of Things and blockchain. And I would even include 3D printing or rooftop solar energy generation, distributed energy, which aren't digital per se, but they're digitally enabled. And you really couldn't do 3D printing very well without digital. You really couldn't manage distributed energy very well without digital. So I was looking at all these technologies and trying to say, are there common underlying dynamics that they drive across industries? And if so, what are they? What are the implications? And I realized from thinking this through that all these digital technologies allow us to distribute sensing, access to data, analytics, agency, production at smaller and smaller levels all around the economy, ever closer to each moment of potential demand. And thus, what digital technologies drive across all industries is digital technologies push the production and provision of products and services ever closer to the moment at which they might be demanded in time and space. So actually, as you've added to our discussion, Kaihan, we're talking about proximity zero, P0. So producing anything we might desire, and you and I both know there are lots of philosophical issues with the word desire and satisfy and all that, but let's set those aside. But business is about satisfying desires, perhaps creating desires and demands, but providing supply for the demand. And over time, what digital technologies enable is for us to more and more effectively, efficiently, economically drive the production of products and services closer to that moment where they're actually demanded.
This next guest has been ranked one of the top 40 thinkers in tech by Time magazine. Here, Vivek Wadhwa presents a forewarning and simultaneously an inspirational perspective on how we can either let technology take over or wield it for the good of our future.
Kaihan, for several years now, I've been talking about exponential technologies, how everything from AI to digital medicine to network sensors, quantum computing, all on exponential paths, and how converging technologies are going to disrupt entire industries, wipe out entire industries. So I've been teaching the basics of exponential technologies. And then I had a whole bunch of my CEO friends saying, okay, Vivek, you scared the crap out of us. What do we do? How do we now survive in this world that you keep telling us about? I'm going back a decade now. Now everyone understands exponentials. Go back a decade and few people understood what exponentials could do to you. So I said, how do we survive it? So then I started thinking about it. I've always been a big fan of Clayton Christensen and Innovator's Dilemma. He is a management guru. I cherish his work, except I began to realize that it doesn't make sense anymore. That the disruption isn't coming from within your industry. You can't see it happening. It's not a mini-mill becoming a threat to you. It's coming out of nowhere. It's, as Peter Diamandis said, it's two kids in a garage developing exponential technology that could wipe out an entire industry. I wrote a book called Driving the Driverless Car, How Our Technology Choices Will Make the Future. What the book did was explain everything from AI to quantum computing. All of these technologies, explained them. And then it explained the good and the bad of them. It said, look, this technology can be used in this good way, can be used in this bad way. And the message of the book was that we have to make some choices because you need to control these technologies, use technology for good. And you don't have to talk about curing cancer. You can uplift your community. In your neighborhood, you can come up with ideas for making it better. You can help the poor. You can do a lot of good for the world. Think big, start small, solve problems. You can solve almost any problem there is now if you come together with other good people and put your heart in it.
Wow, what a journey it's been looking back on these brilliant ideas from our esteemed guest list. To close this recap, we dive into the ideas of prominent futurist Faith Popcorn. We'll hear a small clip that paints a picture of how technology has already changed our lives and a reminder of the kind of perspective we should carry forward in looking towards what is to come.
So when things are bad in a person's environs, so we're running out of water, we're running out of clean air, the world is blowing up, we're using like guns and mortar on each other, we're hurting each other, the politics are high, the divisions are vast. People look for alternatives. And the metaverse is very simply an alternative life. Started in gaming. So you go into a game and maybe you stay in that game for a year or two, but not all day. And then the platforms developed and technology is developing. So we won't need an Oculus into an alternative life. So we'll have our avatars gather around maybe tables and brainstorm. And a lot of people are still, thinking it's a bubble, it's not going to happen. But that's what people always think when there's something startlingly different and new. I think the greatest error that people make about the future is trying to extrapolate what's going to happen from what did happen from the past. That is a major error. The way to figure out the future and become an overnight futurist is look forward, see what you believe will happen. It can be broad strokes, every home will have a robot, all this stuff. So you go to like 2030, 2040, backcast to 2022 and try to create a timeline. And that is how you figure out the future, not from yesterday. Because if you're doing it from yesterday, you're not taking into consideration new standards, new technology, new thinking, new countries, new anything. So you make big mistakes. You say the future of film is better film.
Thank you so much for following us along through 2 years and 100 episodes. We hope you enjoyed revisiting these incredible insights. We want to give an incredibly warm thank you to all 99 guests who have made Outthinkers what it is, and to you, our listeners, who have devoted over 20,000 hours with us. We hope to continue the journey into outthinking in the business world with you. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our executive producer, Karina Reyes, our editor, Zach Ness, our audio engineer, Jack Tipper, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kaihan Krippendorff. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Outthinkers.